Selected style deep house is a genre that has been popularized by the Germany-based record label Selected. If you go on Spotify, you'll see that their playlist for deep house is one of the most popular deep house playlists, and it's also one of the fastest growing. I'm going to be showing you how to create a song in this style, and I'm going to be using my song Choose You as the example. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. This is the session for my song Choose You. I feel like this song is very similar to that Selected style, so I feel like it is a good reference to show you how I made it. Let's first look at the structure here. I generally mark out my structure with these markers here. I have the verse here, the pre, the hook, and then the verses here, and also the pre, which I double the length the second time around, and then the hook, which I also consider the drop. So let me just play a little bit of this, and I'm going to show you a couple of sections of the song.
We've been through this before, didn't know what I'd find in you. I can't do this no more, hiding myself behind the truth. Here we go. No.
That's the vibe of the verse. Let's get into this pre here, which builds up into the drop.
I want your love, you got that touch, I won't give up. You set me free. Don't wanna leave, I can't believe you're all I see. What did you do? I'm breathing you every time I think of you. How did I lose myself in you every time I think of you? Why did I choose you? Why did I choose you?
Hopefully that gives you an idea of the vibe. It's very chill, very poppy with the vocals. The track is very bass heavy. There's not too much going on in the verse. When the drop hits, you have that deep house bass, maybe some string elements, but it's not too crowded. And then you really build into that drop. So basically the way that I structure out a song in a selected style deep house song, notice in the verses, I didn't really have any kick drum. I brought in a kick drum during the drop, and then I bring it back in the second verse at some point. But really you can keep your verses pretty atmospheric and then really build into that drop. So let's first go into the drums. You will see that at the end and when I start mixing, I will usually group everything into 4 to 5 different groups. I have my drums, bass, effects, instruments, and vocals. And this is going to help us go through this track a bit easier. So let's go ahead and start with the drums group. On the bus of the drums group, I just have some bus compression, some soft clipper. This is a K-clip. It's a pretty cool plugin to use for soft clipping. And then I have a Pro Q3, just doing some minor adjustments there. But let's go ahead and open up the drums group. I have just a drum impact here, like a clap. That's just a fill. I have another fill. But let's take a look at the kick. Like I was saying here for the kick, notice we have the verse here, no kick in the verse or this pre-build-up. I really bring in the kick in the drop and then I bring it back in the second verse. But when I bring it back in the second verse, I filter it off a bit so it's not as in your face as the drop and there's some variation between the drop and the verse. So let's go ahead and check that out in the mix.
Nobody knows, we're just young, floating up through the atmosphere.
Versus how the kick would sound in the drop. So if you do want to have a kick in the verses, then try filtering off some of the low end or try filtering off both the low end and the high end. Just try and make it a bit different than the drop and not so in your face as the drop. So now I have just a snare build. This is going to be the build up that I have going into the drop. It's going to be very quiet. And ultimately, for these drum sounds, I have a video on some of my top splice packs that I like to use for deep house. So check that out, and that will give you some ideas of what samples to use. These snares here are probably from one of those packs that I mentioned in that video. This is going to be a Mark Knight pack, you can just find a bunch of really good snare sounds. And essentially for these build-ups, basically all you do is just automate the level of the snare and possibly some of the high end of the snare as it builds up. After that snare build, we have the claps here. Let's just go ahead and play the claps so you can hear them. Pretty cool clap fills. And then for that pre-build-up part, I'm using some different claps that are filtered off the top end a little bit once again. These are going to be my hi-hats and rides here. I like to group these up, so let's check these out. Keeping it pretty simple with the hats, of course, you have just that 909 style hat in the upbeat here, and then I'm using this shaker. Let's go ahead and check that out. To fill in the mix a bit more. Then we have some crashes, and at the end of the song, I add a ride here. And all together with the ride, and the full drop there. And you generally want to build your drums up until that very last drop. So that's why I'm adding in that ride only at the end. And basically the beginning of my very first drop, I don't have any other percussion in there or of the drums except for just the kick. So that's really how you would build those drops up in a selected style deep house track. You have the kick there only, and then you bring in the clap, and then you bring in the hi-hats. And that's just a way to build into it. And then the second time that I hit it, I bring everything in all at once for that second drop. Now I have some crashes, reverse crash, I have some tom percussion, but that's really all I have for those drums. The only other drums I have in the verses is the kick during that second verse, and then also just some hi-hats here in that pre-build-up for the second time. So keep it pretty simple with the drums for the verses. Don't get too crazy with them. Now, after the drums, let's move into the bass. For the bass, I like to group process my bass a lot. So I have the VC76, which is basically your 1176. I have a Pro Q3, just cutting off the low end there. I have a Pro MB. Multiband compressors work really well for bass, especially because if they're too low, you can't hear them, or sometimes they go a bit higher in frequencies and then all of a sudden they become too loud. So a multiband compressor helps you really control the level of a bass. And then I have an OTT on the bass group, but don't worry, it only is going to be 11%. So we're just using that in parallel. And then I'm using a sidechain compressor on my entire bass group so that all of the bass will pump together with the kick. A popular bass to use in the verse of a selected style deep house track is a Reese bass, and that sounds like this. It's really just this pad-like bass that has a bit of portamento, so it just glides as you change the notes, and it's very atmospheric, and that's really what is filling in my verses here.
We've been through this before, didn't know what I'd find in you.
If you notice, I just take that out, and you can only really hear those hi-hats. That's all I'm doing for the verses for the bass, and then let's go to the bass in the drop here. Now there's a couple of layers for the bass in the drop. I have a pluck. I have a sub bass layer here. That's just going to be a basic sub. You probably can't hear that, but it just fills in that low end really nicely. I have some reverse basses sounds. like that, and that one. And then here's another reverse bass. And these are just to add movement to the plucks there. And then I have this growl synth, which everyone is probably familiar with from Medusa. I actually have a tutorial on how to create that sound as well, so I'll put a link down below. And that's gonna really do it for the bass. So let's go ahead and check it out in the track. Let's listen to the track without the bass. Notice it sounds very empty, and that's because Deep House is really driven by the bass. Next, let's go on to our effects. Now, the thing with effects that I generally do is I'll just throw in a bunch of effects as I'm producing my track. And then eventually when I start mixing the track and putting it together, I'll start pulling them out because I start to realize there's way too many effects in there. And a lot of times when you start adding your limiter and everything, they just become way too much. So as you are producing, go ahead and try out a bunch of effects. But as you start to finalize your mix, try pulling out some of your effects and see if you can get by without them, because you might be surprised that your track will sound just as good without all of the effects. So there's not too much here. I just have a reverse vocal sound. And one thing I like to do for my risers is I like to add a auto pan and automate the rate just to make it pan back and forth and rise up as it gets closer. So let's go ahead and check this out. I have the rate that rises up, so it gets a lot faster and pans back and forth. And that's a cool trick that I've heard in some Medusa tracks. I've heard them do that. But I have that reverse vocal, I have some effects sweeps, nothing too crazy. Let's move on to the instrument group. On the bus here, I have some compression. I have an EQ8 cutting off the low end because the low end is really going to be taken up by the bass. And then a Pro Q3 here, just adding some boost to the left and the right. Pro Q3 is cool because you can actually separate the channels. So I can actually add a boost in this area in only the left channel, and then in this area in only the right channel. So that's pretty cool. Let's open up the instruments here. Now, the instruments in Selected Style Deep House is really all about creating the atmosphere. So I'm using a lot of atmospheric pad sounds. And also using this string, this high string note. It's just one note, and it plays basically throughout the entire track. And then I have some other synths here. Let's listen to this one. Just to add a nice melody, I have another melody here. And let's go ahead and check out that melody in the track. After that, we have all of our atmospheres. Let's check them out in the verses here. And let's check them out at the end here. So really, I'm just experimenting with atmospheres. We have some from the Cashmere pack. Let's listen to these ones down here. So some really cool string atmospheres to fill in the track. Next, I have this Selected Style synth here. Which is this cool like winding style effect. And let's go ahead and check that out in the mix.
You're someone I adore. You keep sweeping me off my feet, off my feet. Feelings I can't ignore.
So it adds a bit of movement to the track. I have this rising saw wave synth here that kind of plays and rises up in the drop. And that about does it for the instruments. Now let's move on to the vocals. This is going to be my vocals group. I have the VC160 here, and then a Pro Q3. I have the Pro MB. I have the Pro DS on the group, and then also the Fresh Air plugin here. This is going to be the lead vocal here. Let me solo this.
Go, nobody knows. We're just young, floating up through the atmosphere. Time moves slow.
I actually pitched down her vocal 2 semitones. So I sent the track to her pitched up 2 semitones and had her sing to it regular. And then when she sent me the vocal back, I had it pitched down -2 semitones to fit my actual production here. So that's something you'll notice in this deep house style is that vocals are often detuned a bit. So like -2 semitones or even more sometimes. So that's just something to think about if you want to have these vocals detuned. Then send your track to the singer pitched up a bit, have them sing to it. And then when they send you the vocals back, pitch them down -2 or 3 semitones to fit your actual production session. So we can open up my vocal chain here. I have a low cut, I have some compression here, the Pro C3, the Pro DS. I'm doing some automation with the utility plugin, and then I have all of my audio effects here. Reverb, I have a ping pong and a quarter note delay, which I automate, and then also a slap delay. Now to add some texture to that vocal, I'll often add a vocal that is a whole octave lower. So I'll just take the lead vocal and then pitch it down -12 semitones.
I can't do this no more, hiding myself behind the truth.
Often I place it really low in the track just to add some texture to that lead vocal. Now for my lead vocal during the drop, I actually have the drop vocals on a second track, and that's because she sings them more powerful. So I applied a bit of different processing on these vocals in the drop.
Ooh, I'm breathing you every time I'm thinking you.
So she sings those a lot stronger than in the verses.
Young floating up through the atmosphere.
So often when that happens, you can separate the lead vocal into 2 separate tracks. Next, I have the harmonies here.
I want your love. You got that tight. I won't give up.
So you'll notice I chopped these up, and that's because I took out some of the consonants and some of the S sounds. If you have the S sound from the lead vocal, then you really don't need them from the backgrounds. Otherwise, it might clutter up the vocals. What I also like to do is to create ear candy and vocal delays, vocal reverbs, is I'll just take a word from one of the lead vocals and then put it down onto a new track. So those are you echoed out. And that's the lead vocal pitched up really high. And let's go ahead and listen to those in the track.
Go, nobody knows. We're just young floating up through the
So it adds a really nice texture, and that's also something you can experiment with. Notice on these vocals, there is quite a lot of reverb and delay. That's because this style is very atmospheric. So you can be more liberal with your reverbs and delays when you're doing this style of deep house. And these effects here, they're just adding some really nice ear candy. Next, I have the doubles, and as you can see, I'm chopping up the doubles again, just taking out the S sounds and the consonants. And then here I have some harmonies. So for the harmonies, I don't have any harmonies in the first drop. I bring them in the second drop only, and that is to add some variation to the vocals between the 2 drops. After that, I have these oohs, these O's. And let's listen to them in the mix. Now, I'm not panning these to the left and right. If you look at my other doubles, let's check out the doubles here. I pan them hard left and right. The reason I'm not panning these is because for the lead vocal, and when it has the lead vocal and the doubles and the harmonies, I have them panned pretty wide. And I just wanted to add some variation to the vocals here. So you have them very wide, and then all of a sudden they go very centered and mono during this part, because during this part, I bring in a bit more percussion that's going to fill in the sides. So I thought that that was just like a nice contrast between these 2 parts of the drop. And we can check out the processing on this. I have a compressor, a decapitator that's adding that distortion sound, a Pro Q3 here. Let's check this out. Just really chopping off a lot of that low end and some of the high end there. And then I have some reverb. Now for the master, this is going to be the mastering that I did. I used a solid bus compressor. This is just going to be a bus compressor, the K-clip for some soft compression, the Pro Q3. I used an EQ8 and the SPL Vitalizer to add some stereo width here using this stereo expander. And then I'm using the Pro L2 to add my limiting, and that's really it. So hopefully that will help you get started with creating a selected style deep house track. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and give it a like. And also, please, if you are not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing to my channel. And finally, if you are truly looking to improve your mixing skills, then check out my Modern Mix Academy. This is a full online mixing course that I created that will help you make some of the best records of your life from the comfort of your own home. I'll put a link down below for you to check that out. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.